disobedience. On the other hand, the Abrahamic covenant, will, was made valid by Jesus' death. The inheritance is obtained by the will of God alone, and by the blood of the true sacrifice for sin, Jesus Christ. Those who believe that their own decision will save them, those who believe that salvation comes by the will of man, are in the same position as the majority were in the Old Testament. This opinion led quite naturally to the idea that keeping the law could save men. And so throughout history, from ancient Israel and even throughout the history of the Church, we find men seeking the perfection of the flesh through self-discipline. With it came the idea that doctrinal perfection, orthodoxy, was also necessary to salvation, for one had to be perfected in both body and soul, mind. These misconceptions have put a great burden upon the Church. Christians everywhere are driven to seek personal perfection in order to be saved. Many are full of guilt for not fulfilling their vow to be perfect.
Right.
Christianity for them has become a performance-based religion. So long as they see in themselves personal imperfections, they walk in guilt and fear, rather than in forgiveness and faith. The solution is to see that our salvation and justification is based upon the decision of God Himself. Our ability to be obedient is a sanctification process by which we as Christians learn to hear God's voice as He leads us to the promised land, the perfection of the Feast of Tabernacles.
Amen. Let's read that one again. Wow, our ability to be obedient is a sanctification process by which we as Christians learn to hear God's voice as He leads us to the promised land, the perfection of the Feast of Tabernacles. Amen.
Jesus never advocated breaking the law, nor did the Apostle Paul. But Paul very carefully explains to us that it is impossible for us to obtain our inheritance, salvation, by means of the law covenant. It comes instead by the death of Jesus, which validated the Abrahamic covenant, the unconditional promise that we shall receive the inheritance. And what He has promised, He will see to it that it shall be done.
For this is His will.
How shall we build a barn? In our illustration earlier, we said that the second covenant was a condition that the son should build a barn before he could receive his inheritance. This is a conditional provision, which cannot nullify the first covenant, yet it delays the inheritance for a time. Thus, it is not really a question of if, but of when the son inherits the promise.
Amen.
We answered the question of when in our previous chapters, where we deal with the three harvests.
Right.
Different people inherit at different times.
Right.
Or to put it another way, some people decide to build their barns before others do. Christians are people who have left Egypt on the way to the promised land. This is the real barn that God is telling us to build.
Okay.
To continue our illustration, let us say that your son decides to start building the barn immediately. You are pleased. However, he does not know how to build a barn. He is unskilled and unlearned. In fact, the reason you made that covenant was because you wanted him to learn this art. The purpose of this covenant was to teach him something he did not know.
Okay.
So first you point to a barn that has already been built. See that barn, son? There is your model. Build one for yourself just like that one. If you have any questions, just study that barn. Well, in pouring the foundations, he gets too much gravel for the amount of cement, and the concrete is somewhat weak. He comes to you and asks what he did wrong, and you instruct him. Then he relays the foundation. Quite a delay. But then, the best way to learn is by trial and error. Next, he tries to construct the walls, but they are not quite plumb. Once again, you show him the right way, and this time he does better, still not perfect, but you are pleased that he continues to learn. Finally, when the barn is finished, he comes to you and says, I have finished the barn, now may I have my inheritance? You come to inspect the barn. You notice that the floor is not quite level, and the walls have some cracks in them. The roof leaks a bit, but after all, it is sturdy enough to provide shelter for the cows. Well done, you tell your son. It looks perfect. The inheritance is now yours. As a good carpenter, you know that the barn is far from perfect. But as a good father, you also know that you have trained your son, and he has learned a great deal. And so you overlook what is, and call what is not as though it were, wrong. 4:17. You impute perfection to the building. You reckon it perfect, even though the roof leaks.
Imputed righteousness.
Then you call your son to your side and tell him, I had you build this barn in order that you might know how difficult it is to construct perfectly. I also wanted you to become skilled in building barns. But in actual fact, the barn that you have been using as your model is the only barn that I require as a finished product. This perfect barn I now give to you to replace the imperfect barn. And now, all that you see before you